typically a classroom where we're spending 350% more today. I mean, I don't know the numbers in Canada, but I looked up in the UK and it's largely similar. Like there's more and more money going into what is still essentially the same format. And I have grandchildren at school here, and it's the same format. The teacher decides on the curriculum. In fact, what we have is what I call the classroom triangle. The teacher has to teach a curriculum. There are tests to make sure that whatever the curriculum was, whatever was taught at the kids, that the kids are able to reproduce it. And the other thing the teacher worries about is how to keep people busy in the classroom. So basically, the three preoccupations are, how do we teach the curriculum, how do I test that they learned anything, and how do I keep them occupied? In other words, the teacher's in charge. And my belief is, and this is another book that I recommend, that's not how the brain learns. In fact, the brain learns all the time. The brain is built to learn. It'll always learn. It'll learn through exposure. It'll form patterns in its own. The brain will form patterns in order that it can deal with these situations that keep coming at it. But the brain decides what it's going to learn when. And the brain doesn't necessarily comply with the curriculum that the teacher, or the order that the teacher has decided upon. And the major issue is motivation, enjoyment, and alertness. And so, again, it's a matter of training oneself to be attentive to what's happening. But the three are related. If you're not motivated, you're not enjoying it. If you're not motivated and enjoying it, you aren't paying attention. So those are the things that teachers have to worry about. And language learning, or learning, means changing, and there is also some degree of resistance to learning. Because when you learn, you change, and a lot of people don't want to change. So if I bring that to the subject of language learning, which interests me, what I have found to be largely true is what this gentleman, Stephen Krashen, says, and that is to learn a language, which is my interest, he says, all you need is input. That's all you need. If you have enough input, that is reading and listening, if you have enough input, the brain, which is used to learning and likes to learn, the brain will start to form its own patterns and labels to deal with the language. And he says, all the structures we need to learn are already there if you provide them with enough comprehensible input. And of course, you can't give people incomprehensible input. You have to give people input that's of interest to them and comprehensible. And therefore, we don't need to teach grammar, says he. I don't fully agree. Because I do believe that there are things you can do to help the learner be more attentive to what's happening in the language. Because there are certain things you're going to hear or read and you aren't going to notice time and time and time again. So there are things you can do to make the brain more attentive. But the bigger thing is, in my opinion, that we need to, I can only speak from my experience as a language learner, we need to kind of explode the boundaries. And so that we don't deal with the classroom situation with a teacher, kids in the class, primary concern is to push through the curriculum, get people to, behave in the classroom and pass tests, but that we have learning communities more like what Matt Ridley referred to, where people are learning from each other, exchanging information, languages, experiences, and so forth and so on. And I think that is the promise of the internet, the promise that the iPad makes more accessible than ever before. And so if we get back to the real learning triangle, is not curriculum, tests, and keeping people busy in the classroom. The real learning triangle is attitude, time spent, and attentiveness. In other words, if we take the example of language, if you are very motivated to learn a language, if you believe you can do it, if you like the language, you have a friend who speaks that language, if you don't resist the language, you can learn. And if you're willing to spend the time. But you also need to be trained a little bit to notice what's happening. Because very often it can take you a long time to notice. So, with that, we now move to what's happening on the internet. And on the internet now, there is so much content, and I'll show you some examples later on, that, and here's an example of the little symbol of the iPad, but online dictionaries. Online dictionaries with conjugations. If you want to conjugate a French verb, if you put French verb, I tried it out, there's something like 653,000 pages. You just go French verbs. So you oh, what's your verb? The verb, donner or something. Donner. Bingo. It's all there. All the information you need. Online dictionaries. You have unbelievable online content. For an example, Russian. You have language courses. You have communities where people exchange language. You speak to me in Chinese, I'll speak to you in English. I write something in Chinese, you correct it. And there's all kinds of these. It's extraordinary what's available on the internet. And I want to digress a little bit from the language issue. And just as an example of what happens on the internet, someone sent me a video. This is in this TED, T-E-D series that some of you may be familiar with. And this gentleman, Sugata Mitra, is an Indian educator. And he took a computer and put it in a wall, in a hole in a wall in a Delhi slum. And the local kids came by and on their own figured out how to use the computer. And then he did a number of these experiments. Then he had a group of, again, Indian kids, 10-year-olds or whatever, and he gave them a computer, and then he gave them this software where you dictate at the computer, and then the computer types for you. So the kids were all excited at this. However, the software wouldn't recognize their Indian accent. But they had access there to English spoken, in the accent that the software would recognize, which was some kind of English accent. He came back 3 months later, and they were all speaking the way those people spoke. Because they were motivated. It all boils down to motivation. People will learn. And his perspective is that education is a self-organizing system. And, and he has a number of examples to prove it. Now, I mentioned this to my wife, and she said, yeah, but what about those kids that aren't very interested? Of course. that is the obvious question. Those people who are interested will learn. Yeah, and I think that's the big question for a teacher, is how to motivate kids. But my question is, in the classroom, is what they do motivating for kids or not motivating? And I suspect the objective, because it's more get the curriculum through, pass tests, therefore they're not as concerned about motivating them as they could be. But getting back to languages, here are some examples. Rhino Spike is a community where people on demand record. Like somebody would say, would you record this for me in Serbian? Somebody on there will record it, and they can take it and listen to it. I'll show you, we have a community called Link. A lot of our members who might be studying Portuguese or Japanese, if they have texts that they want recorded, they just put them up there. But they then also, if they're, let's say, French-speaking, they would go in there and record stuff in French. And they get credit for doing so, and so forth and so on. When I show our community, you'll see that in our community, members contribute content to our library in 11 languages. And the content has to consist of text and audio. So very often if they don't have a native speaker audio, they will take the text that they want, they'll get it, someone at RhinoSpike to record it, then they put it in our library. Our members can access it for learning French. Whoever uploaded that gets points on our system for having uploaded it. Live Mocha is a community where people can find friends to talk to, language exchange, they record things, and native speakers critique